What if the most dangerous moment in this war isn't the missiles being fired, but the silence right after? Because right now, two things are happening at the exact same time, and they cannot both be true. And one of them is a lie. If you want to understand what's really going on in the Persian Gulf before the mainstream media catches up, hit like, subscribe right now, and send this to someone who needs to see it. This is the kind of analysis most channels won't touch. Here's the contradiction that defines this moment. Sources inside a negotiating room in Islamabad are leaking to major news networks that the United States and Iran may have just agreed to a 60-day ceasefire, a framework to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran committing, in principle, to stop enriching uranium for the next 15 to 20 years and dismantle its nuclear sites. That is one reality. Here is the other. 4 nights ago, a United States Navy guided missile destroyer positioned itself in the Persian Gulf, turned into the wind, and fired 49 Tomahawk cruise missiles in a single night. Those missiles flew across Iranian skies and struck radar installations, communication hubs, air defense batteries, and headquarters belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And the Secretary of Defense told the world on the record, "We will be busy tonight." A peace deal, and 49 cruise missiles. Both cannot represent the same trajectory. One of them is a performance. Your job, and this video's job, is to figure out which one. To do that, you need to understand something most coverage of this conflict completely misses. This is not one story. It is 3 stories running in parallel: a financial war, a military campaign, and a psychological operation, all converging at the same moment. And when 3 forces converge like this, the outcome surprises everyone, including the people steering them. Let's go back to where this actually started. Not to the first explosion, to the first failure. That failure happened on February 28th, 2026. And it was a failure of judgment by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a miscalculation that set everything that followed into motion. On that date, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign called Operation Epic Fury. In the first 24 hours alone, more than 1,000 Iranian military targets were struck: B-2 stealth bombers, F-22s, F-16s, A-10 attack aircraft, electronic warfare platforms, Tomahawk missiles. And for the first time in documented combat history, an American one-way attack drones, built deliberately in the image of Iranian designs, were turned back against the country that pioneered their use. In the opening hours of that campaign, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and dozens of senior regime figures were killed. A government that had spent 4 decades constructing nuclear ambitions, funding proxy armies across the Middle East, and promising to outlast every American administration, the government lost its entire leadership class in a single night. Let that land for a moment. But here's the context beneath that headline, because this war did not come from nowhere. 8 months before Operation Epic Fury, there had been a ceasefire. A 12-day conflict in June 2025 had ended through mediation by the United States and Qatar. And during those 8 months of relative quiet, Iran did exactly what Pentagon planners expected. It used the pause to rebuild. Intelligence assessments showed Iran moving materials into hardened underground bunkers, attempting to upgrade its air defense systems, and continuing to enrich uranium while insisting its nuclear program was peaceful. By early June 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency had confirmed Iran held more than 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Weapons-grade threshold is 90%. With a functioning centrifuge program already running, the distance between those two numbers is not measured in years. It is measured in weeks. That timeline is what triggered February 28th. The window was closing, and everyone in Washington knew it. So when Operation Epic Fury began, it was not a reaction to a single provocation. It was the end point of a decade-long pattern that had finally reached the moment of no return. And the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, did not collapse. They never collapse. That is not admiration. That is a clinical observation about how they are built. Now here is where the conflict stands today. As of June 15th, 2026, this war is 107 days old. According to the Secretary of Defense, the United States has struck more than 15,000 targets inside Iran since operations began. Radar installations, missile storage sites, command and control centers, drone manufacturing facilities, ballistic missile production plants, naval assets, communication infrastructure, all of it degraded systematically over more than 3 months of sustained precision strikes. The Secretary stated publicly that Iran's missile inventory is down 90% from pre-war levels. Its one-way attack drone capacity is down 95%. And Iran's entire ballistic missile industrial base, every facility, every supply chain, every manufacturer involved in building those weapons, has been, in his words, functionally destroyed. Read that carefully. Not damaged, not degraded, functionally destroyed. And yet, 4 days ago, the IRGC launched 12 ballistic missiles. They sent attack drones over the U.S. Navy's home port in Bahrain. They targeted American air bases in Kuwait and Jordan. They threw a long-range missile at a forward deployment base hosting American F-35s. A 90% reduction is not zero. It is rationing. It is a military force counting its remaining shots and choosing its moments carefully, not for maximum kinetic damage, but for maximum visibility. Because when you're running out of weapons, the only currency you have left is the appearance of strength. That shift, from fighting to performing, is the single most important thing happening in this conflict right now. So, what triggered this latest round? Roughly 36 hours before the June 10th strike package launched, an Iranian Shahed drone shot down a United States Army Apache helicopter operating over the Strait of Hormuz. The aircraft went down. The crew, through a combination of engineering and extraordinary luck, survived, crash landing the stricken helicopter and being recovered from the Persian Gulf by autonomous maritime drones deployed by a U.S.-based robotics company. Both crew members were pulled out of the water uninjured. That recovery story barely made headlines. It should have. The United States military just extracted 2 soldiers from an active combat zone in the Persian Gulf using unmanned sea drones in real time. That is not a footnote. That is a demonstration of where warfare is going, conducted live. But the downed Apache was also a trigger. Washington called it a brutal attack on American forces. U.S. Central Command described its response as proportional. And if you understand how CENTCOM defines proportional, you understand that word is doing a lot of work. Night 1 of the American response hit Iranian air defense sites, radar networks, and ground control stations spanning the strait. Night 2 escalated. The USS Michael Murphy launched 49 Tomahawks across the entire country, not just near the water, but deep inland. Targets in Karaj, Natanz, southeast of Tehran, Bandar Abbas, Qashm Island, and simultaneously IRGC leadership headquarters, hundreds of miles from the coastline. That is not proportional. That is a message. There's no safe address inside your borders. Now, pay close attention to what happened next, because this is where the financial and military tracks merge into something far more significant. On June 11th, the president posted a public statement threatening that the United States intended to seize Karg Island, the small coral island in the northern Persian Gulf that, before this war, handled approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports and assumed total control of Iran's oil and gas markets. Iran is the 3rd largest producer in OPEC. In 2023, its net oil export revenues were estimated at around $53 billion, roughly 12% of the country's entire GDP. That revenue does not just fund the government, it funds the IRGC's payroll, its weapons procurement, its proxy armies in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria, its nuclear program, the subsidy infrastructure keeping ordinary Iranians from open rebellion. Seize Karg Island and you are not winning a military engagement. You are collapsing the economic foundation of an entire theocracy. Hours after that announcement, the president walked it back, citing diplomatic discussions. And shortly after that, came the reports of a potential deal, threat to seize the oil hub. Iran scrambles, deal announced. That sequence is not coincidence. That is leverage applied at the highest level. And here's something important you need to pause on, because most coverage skips past it entirely. Stop for a second. If this breakdown of the 3-track war, financial, military, psychological, is making something click for you that wasn't clicking before, share this video right now. Put it on your feed. Text it to someone, not for the algorithm, because this kind of clarity is exactly what gets buried under breaking news chyrons and official statements designed to confuse more than inform. Now let's talk about what each side actually wants, because the gap between the two positions is enormous. Iran's stated demands going into negotiations were full war reparations from the United States, complete withdrawal of American military forces from the entire Middle East, and internationally recognized rights to continue developing its nuclear program. Every one of those demands is a non-starter, and they were designed to be, because the IRGC's actual goal was never a negotiated settlement. It was to use ceasefire periods the same way it used the last one, to reconstitute, rebury materials in underground bunkers, rebuild stockpiles, and emerge from talks in a stronger position than when it entered. It wanted an exit ramp that preserved the regime's ability to keep threatening. The American demands have been stated consistently and publicly. Iran must end all uranium enrichment. It must dismantle its nuclear sites. It must reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international commercial shipping. It must stop financing and arming proxy forces across the region. And it must accept a real, verifiable monitoring framework with actual enforcement, not the hollow inspection regime that 2015 nuclear deal produced, which Iran began violating almost immediately. The draft framework, now reportedly on the table, asks Iran to commit to zero enrichment for 15 to 20 years, with all nuclear sites dismantled under international supervision, in exchange for sanctions, relief, and an end to the naval blockade. On paper, that is a historic agreement. Whether it means anything depends entirely on a question no intelligence agency has been able to definitively answer. Who in Tehran is actually making decisions right now? Here's the structural problem that almost nobody is discussing clearly enough. Iran has two faces in any negotiation: the outward-facing diplomatic apparatus, the foreign minister, the president, parliamentary speakers, speaks the language of dialogue and confidence building. These are the voices the world hears. None of them make the decisions. The IRGC does. Specifically, IRGC Commander Major General Hossein Salami and the hardline clerical network now consolidated around Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the original supreme leader, installed after his father was killed in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury. As of June 15, 2026, Mojtaba Khamenei's physical condition is unconfirmed. He may be wounded. He may be operating from deep inside Iran's tunnel network. His precise location and his ability to command are unknown. That is not a minor detail. That is the most important unknown variable in this entire war. Because if Mojtaba Khamenei is incapacitated, or if real power has fractured between competing IRGC commanders without a functioning chain of command, then the deal diplomats are signing in Islamabad may not bind the people who actually control the missiles. A ceasefire agreement the IRGC is not bound to is not a ceasefire. It is a press release. The IRGC's own doctrine demands three non-negotiables: war reparations, American withdrawal from the region, and the right to nuclear development. To the hardline faction, these are not bargaining chips. They are theological absolutes. Because the IRGC's survival as a power structure depends on the nuclear program. Without it, the IRGC is simply a military that lost. With it, even just the credible possibility of it, the IRGC becomes an untouchable deterrent force. Every missile depot destroyed, every radar installation vaporized, every fast attack craft sunk is acceptable loss if the nuclear program survives. That is the lens through which every IRGC decision must be read. Now let's look at what the United States has actually built over these 107 days, because the tactical architecture of this campaign is extraordinary and deserves to be understood clearly. Before a single-strike aircraft can fly freely over Iranian airspace, the air defense systems protecting that airspace must be neutralized. The aircraft built specifically for that job is the F-16CJ, the variant known as the Wild Weasel. Its entire mission is built around a deliberately terrifying proposition. It flies into enemy airspace and invites radar operators to turn on their systems. The moment a radar beam activates, the F-16CJ detects it, triangulates the source, and fires the HARM missile, a weapon that tracks the radar emission back to its origin and destroys it. The Wild Weasel does not wait to be targeted. It goes hunting. It dares the enemy to announce itself and then punishes that announcement instantly. During the ceasefire period, intelligence suggested Iran had used the pause to upgrade its air defense systems, potentially with components that arrived on Chinese cargo flights, though Beijing denied any weapons transfers. If those upgrades had been successfully integrated, American strike aircraft would have faced a fundamentally more dangerous environment when operations resumed. The Wild Weasel's role neutralized that advantage entirely. By forcing every Iranian radar operator to choose between activating their system and dying, or keeping it off and going blind, the F-16CJ effectively stripped away whatever Iran had rebuilt during the pause. 49 Tomahawks and multiple strike packages across the entire Iranian map in a single night without losing a single American aircraft. That result is the proof of how completely that suppression mission succeeded. Behind it came the F-15E Strike Eagle, delivering bunker-penetrating munitions against the hardened underground facilities where Iran had moved its reconstituted stockpiles. The IRGC believed going underground was its insurance policy. The GBU-28 demonstrates there is no depth at which a hardened facility becomes safe from American precision capability, provided American intelligence can find it. F-35s operated in surveillance and battle management roles, feeding real-time targeting data across the network. Navy Super Hornets hit coastal targets and Strait of Hormuz infrastructure from carrier decks, 4 carrier strike groups operating simultaneously. Marines, forward deployed and positioned, not yet committed to ground assault, but visible enough that the IRGC cannot ignore them in its planning. Karg Island requires roughly 800 to 1,000 troops to seize and hold. Those Marines are not in the region by accident. The financial dimension of this campaign has been equally decisive. The U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports has choked off the vast majority of Iran's crude exports. Before this war, Iran's oil revenues generated roughly $500 million per day for the government. That money funded everything: the IRGC's operations, its proxy network, its weapons programs, and the domestic subsidies keeping the population from open revolt. The blockade did not cut that off completely. Some oil moved through smuggling networks, but the combination of naval interdiction, the deliberate targeting of vessels attempting to run the blockade, and the credible threat of further action against energy infrastructure has effectively collapsed the regime's operational cash flow. The Karg Island announcement was the final step in that logic. It told the regime, "We will not just strangle your revenue. We will remove your ability to ever monetize your oil again." That is not a sanction. That is economic decapitation. And on the psychological track, the most revealing data point is not what the IRGC says in its official statements. It is the size and cadence of its attacks. At the start of this war, the IRGC launched waves of hundreds of missiles and drones simultaneously, designed to overwhelm air defenses through sheer volume. In early June, they launched 12 ballistic missiles, spaced days apart, aimed at a single target set. That shift tells you everything. A force with resources executes a strategy. A force without resources manages depletion. The IRGC right now is not selecting targets based on strategic priority. It is selecting targets based on what message it can still afford to send with the assets it has remaining. Every launch is now a budget decision. And that psychological exhaustion, the gap between the ferocity of the IRGC's rhetoric and the dwindling scale of its actual strikes, is the clearest intelligence signal available about how much this force has left. So here is where everything stands. A deal may be signed. But the structural risk that no one is discussing clearly enough is the implementation gap. What happens the day after the ink dries? If an IRGC commander, potentially operating under a fractured chain of command, with the supreme leader's condition unknown, decides unilaterally that the agreement is illegitimate, what then? This is not a hypothetical. The April ceasefire was violated within hours. The extended ceasefire was violated repeatedly. The Apache was shot down during a period of supposed reduced hostility. A ceasefire the IRGC violates reflexively is not a ceasefire. It is a reload interval, 49 cruise missiles, and possibly a deal. Both of those things happened within 4 days of each other. The same ship that emptied her launch cells toward the Iranian command structure may have fired the last major salvo before an agreement that reshapes the Middle East for a generation, or it may have fired the last salvo before the next violation sends everything back to full operational tempo. The answer depends on one thing. When the IRGC's hardline commanders look at what they have left, rationed missiles, destroyed infrastructure, depleted stockpiles, a supreme leader whose condition is unknown, a civilian population under economic siege, do they see enough to go one more round? Or do they finally see the ceiling? That calculation, being made right now in a hardened facility somewhere beneath Iranian soil, is the most consequential strategic decision on the planet at this moment. And nobody outside that room knows the answer yet.